You're listening to Cardiff City World on Cymru Sport Radio, live from the Welsh capital. The most interactive football show in Wales, featuring guests, fan opinion, and all the latest news surrounding Cardiff City. Have your say and get in touch now.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Cardiff City World and the Welsh Football Hour live on Cymru Sport and, of course, Cardiff City World if you prefer to watch along. We will have a jam-packed show this evening. We have, of course, former Wales international Mark Bowen. We have all the latest Cardiff City news with the fan view, as well as the Wrexham podcast Fearless in Devotion will be joining us a bit later on to talk about their season and much, much more. So stick with us, get your questions in. As always, we want to hear your views. But with no further ado, let's bring in our first guest of the evening.
You're listening to Cymru Sport.
I'm delighted to be joined by former Wales international and, of course, a storied career as a player and a manager and a coach. None other than Mr. Mark Bowen. How are you, Mark?
I'm fine, Si. How are you? All right?
Yeah, very good, mate. Very good. A bit of a hectic evening, but that's another one for another story, I suppose. It's never a dull moment, as they say. But I've been really looking forward to having a good chat with you, to be honest, all week, because I think there's so many different elements of your career, which I find, quite fascinating. And I think you can give a bit of insight as well into some of the things which are going on in the current world of modern football. But let's talk about your playing career first, mate. When you look back on that career, is there any particular moments or, I don't know, periods which really you look back like super fondly?
Well, obviously the one that stands out more than anything is making my debut for Wales. Obviously, when you get to stand there and go through all the procedure, I call it, of the national anthem playing. I made my debut on a tour. It was actually an end of season tour, summer tour of Canada. I got invited along. Mike England was the manager, and I think Dean Saunders made his debut. I think, if I'm right in saying, in the same trip, but and it was a laid back tour, but it doesn't excuse a situation where you're making your debut and it's a huge occasion and a huge situation to have. So that's the number one thing, obviously, that stands to mind. I guess in terms of my club career, I started off at Tottenham Hotspur, went on to Norwich City, where I had my best years, I would probably say, as a player. Then I went on to West Ham, and then a strange sort of thing happened. I'd signed a 3-year deal at West Ham. I'm rushing through it. Sorry, forgive me at the moment. So I had a 3-year deal at West Ham, and we got to signed in the summer. I got to, I think it was the January or the December time, and I got a phone call from an ex-player, colleague, friend of mine, Ozzy Ardiles, who was managing in Japan at the time. And the phone call was made by Steve Perriman, who was his assistant at the time, ex-Spurs captain. And it literally went like this. It was a Sunday morning. I played for West Ham against Leeds on the Saturday. We got beat. We were in the bottom 3. And I got a phone call Sunday morning where Steve Perriman said, "Hi, Taff. How are you? Yeah. Would you like to come to Japan? Right. Our left back's done his knee in. We want you here. We need you here by next week. You've got to get a free transfer to West Ham, otherwise the deal's off. But if you do come," and he told me what the wage would be, only for a year, but it was astronomical. Mm. So he left it with me to go and speak to Harry Redknapp and see if I could get out of West Ham, if you like. I mean, I was at that sort of age as well, where it was, I started looking one eye on the official, what they call retirement age at 35, thinking, well, this money's too good to turn down. I'll carry on with the story just because I've started off. So it was interesting. So I went to the training ground on the Monday morning, and Ian Dowie was the PFA rep, as they say. So I went to see Ian. I said, "Ian, I need to chat to you, mate." So I told him about the conversation I'd had. What should I do? And he just said, "Listen, no beating about the bush. You just got to pull him. Just pull Harry and tell him exactly what's happened, and can you go?" So, all right. So I'd actually wrote down on a bit of paper and put in my pocket what they'd offered me. So I went in to see. I asked Harry after training, "Can I come and see you?" And bit quizzical. Yeah, okay. So went to see him, sat in his office opposite the desk, and I said, right, H, he said, what do you want, Tav? I said, right, H, I got a situation. I had this phone call, and you can see him getting redder and redder and more irate. And he sort of said, yeah, and what do you want me to do? I said, can I go to Japan? And he said, Jesus Christ, I've just brought you in the summer. We're in the bottom three. You're trying to jump ship. And I said, no, I'm not. I said, it's just I've got this opportunity. And while he was halfway through a sentence, I sort of reached in my pocket and pushed the bit of paper across the desk of what they were offering me. And bless him, mid-sentence, he picked up the bit of paper, looked at it, and he looked at me back and said, you got to go. And I said, oh, I've got to go. I don't want to go, mate. I love it here at West Ham. But that was the way it went. And very, very quickly, within 3 days, I was in Japan. And I had a year playing out there. Came back from Japan, went to Charlton Athletic, where we got promotion there into the Premier League in the playoffs in that famous game, as they call it, against Sunderland. And I had about 3 months after that finished my career really at Wigan Athletic, because the manager, John Benson, was a friend of mine. So, but that was basically it. But I know I'm rabbiting on there, but I'm coming up for breath here. But I had probably the most important sort of, or the one that sticks out more than ever, was when I was at Norwich, and we had a very, very good side. And we played Bayern Munich in the UEFA Cup and beat them. Still, I think to this day, the only English team or British team or English team to beat them on their home soil there. And we won the game, and I got a goal, and we beat them, ended up going through the tie. And it was even now it's looked back very fondly by fans from Norwich and players and staff alike.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Norwich Bayern Munich game is such a famous game. I think for any football fans who are old enough to remember that, it sticks out because it was it's almost like an anomaly anyway for Norwich to be in Europe, in fairness to them. But then to go and, come up against one of the big boys is like a dream come true for the players, the fans, and, the club as a whole. But to then go and get the result is even that one step further, which maybe a lot of people didn't understand or didn't expect. Sorry. But equally, you had a very, very good side. That Norwich side was really, really good. There was one player I actually wanted to ask you about from that side, and that was Jeremy Goss. I remember watching him play sometimes, and I just thought he was ahead of his time, especially when I look back on it now in terms of his technical ability and the way he used to play football. What was he like to play with?
Yeah, Jerry was, in fairness, he had a lot of years at Norwich, and it wasn't a lot of those years he was a regular, but at that time he became a regular in the team. He was a huge, what I would call, athlete. He box-to-box midfield player and would cover, back in the day, I'm telling you, 14K a game. Back in the day, I think most players were around about 10, 11, exceptional 12 kilometres a game. He'd be banging out 14K a game because he was that fit and that strong and powerful. And he just had that sort of incredible season where it wasn't just that game. I think he scored goal of the season away at Leeds. Same year, kept smashing volleys in from everywhere. And that's right, but we had a couple of interesting situations. The year that Norwich finished third, that we ended up qualifying, obviously for the UEFA Cup as it was then. We got to the January and we were 7 points clear at the top of the Premier League with the game in hand.
Wow.
And that's, I always tell people with smiling, actually, because I got a lot of friends at Norwich, that I can remember back in those days. I can remember playing Liverpool at home for Norwich, and it was 0-0 at half time, and we got booed off the pitch.
Wow.
The expectation was so high at the time. It was, but it was a real unique and special few years. We had good players and a really good team spirit. We didn't really, I would say, have any superstars, although, the likes of, Rule Fox was a top player, and obviously Chris Sutton as well. But he was a young player at the time. So, we had a real good camaraderie amongst us. We played good football, almost like the way football's played now. We like to play out from the back and keep possession. It was possession-based, and it really worked for us, and it was a special time, and we really enjoyed it.
So Martin in the live chat has kind of pinched my question, so I will give him the credit. But he said he asked basically what made your time at Norwich so special, which you've also, touched on that a little bit. But he said, what about that environment allowed you as an individual to thrive, and also those other players that you've mentioned?
Yeah, I think first of all, the players you played with. I mean, you mentioned Jeremy Goss there. We had a player, a good friend of mine, Ian Crook, who to this day, how Ian Crook never played for England, I don't know, because massively underrated player. He was almost like a carbon copy, and believe me when I say this, of the likes of Glenn Hoddle. I mean, Ian Crook, you could give him the ball, and his passing range was incredible. So, and the interesting thing was that I think Ken Brown was the manager who took me to Norwich those years ago, and they looked at a lot of you find a lot of clubs now in recruiting, tend to look at the reserves, if you like, or the top young players of Premier League clubs, and that's even in other Premier League clubs. They're looking at the Man Cities and the like, and their best youngsters to take them away from there. Well, Ken Brown at the time spent a lot of time looking at Tottenham's reserves, which I was part of and played in. And out of Tottenham's reserves, he took myself, Ian Crook, Ian Culverhouse, John Polston, Gary Book, bless him, who passed away recently. There was 5 or 6 players. We grew up together at Tottenham. So for me, moving from Tottenham as a youngster to Norwich, there wasn't a lot of, if you like, difference. They wanted to play the right way. A lot of my friends were there. And it was just a philosophy at the club, and I guess to a degree still is today. There are certain clubs that have almost like they have a duty to their fans. They have let's say, a culture and a way of playing that they've always had, and they try to maintain that through thick and thin. And so because of that, it was going into that environment and being able to express yourself and play the way we played. That was the key thing, really, of anything.
Of course, and I'm assuming times like that at Norwich and the other clubs you played at, you'd have taken different lessons from different coaches, different managers. Yourself into your coaching career and your managerial career. Then, was there particular people who had a bigger influence on the way you look at things than others?
Growing up back in the day, Tom, I left Neath. I grew up in Neath and left there when I was 15 and a half, went to Tottenham. Went through the period as you do, you miss home and the homesickness period. But Tottenham was quite a unique club at the time because you had the likes of Steve Perryman was the captain, Steve Perryman, and the likes of Ozzy Ardiles, Glenn Hoddle, that type of personality and player where. And I mean, no disrespect to Keith Birkenshaw's the manager there, and Peter Shreves after him and whatever, but it was almost like a player-led club. Your learning curve as a youngster going in there was you just every day to go in and look at the senior players and the way they conducted themselves, the way they behaved, on and off the pitch, and it gave me a real great, if you like, understanding, if you like, of what's important at times in football and the way you conduct yourself and on the pitch as well. You take all those things, bits from every club you've been at, and when you go into coaching, then I think what does always sort of stick with me is the fact, when you come from, let's say, a tough working class background and whatever, I've always in my coaching and when I've been with players is you demand in the right ways, of course, but you demand that they give their all. There's a very, very simple saying in football that if you can't run, you can't play. No matter how good you are, and the best teams in world football are the ones who got players with talent but also want to run. You get a team or a club that's got top players, but they don't or can't want to run. They're not successful. So it all comes down to it. I say the likes of myself, or any player, that the ones who are the pundits on television now, the Gary Nevilles, the Rio Ferdinands, or whatever. If they could run, they'd still be playing because in there upstairs in their head, they're as good as they've ever been. But so the modern day player, if you can't run, you're not used to anybody, or you don't want to run. So it's probably the majority of the poor ones, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, that's what we say to my under-16s team is because they're a very good football side, but we always say to them, if you gotta work hard first and foremost and earn the right to play your football before you can, think about the rest of it, you've got to outwork the opposition, you've got to outrun them. Mark, with regard to the coaching, was that something that you always wanted to go into? Was it something which just came about?
No, it was something I always wanted to go into because I love the game so much. And when you get this, feel like you're early or mid-30s, you're looking and thinking, well, almost like I don't want this to stop. The being involved in football and the buzz of football. So how can you sort of almost like recreate or keep that adrenaline rush of being involved in football? So that was probably the benchmark for it, and or the foundation for it. And then you think, okay, well, I want to go into coaching. The interesting story about it is that around about the sort of 35 years old, something like 34, 35, I went on a FA coaching course, and it was they were fast tracking Premier League players or ex-Premier players doing the B license, as they called it then. So I went to do the B license, and as I turned up there, Mark Hughes was there. And obviously I know Mark, I've been friends with him for many, many years, but probably typical of Mark, he didn't let me know what he was doing, if you like. So turned up and Mark was there, and we ended up doing the B license together. When we finished the B license, I sort of cajoled him and said, right, come on, we got to carry straight on and do the A license, which we did. And then after the A license, I had in my head, they just started doing or promoting, they were going to do this thing called the Pro license. So I had a call with someone from the English FA and said, okay, I think it was the inaugural course, saying, okay, yeah, I want to do it. And also I chucked Mark's name in. And when the sort of thing came back, the email or whatever, was saying, yes, okay, you're on the course, I ended up ringing Mark and saying, right, I've just booked us on the Pro license course, which he wasn't too enamored with it. He was like, what are you doing? Why have you done that? I says, come on, we got to do it together. So we did the Pro license course. And round about that time then, Mark had the situation with Wales, obviously, that I think him and Neville Southall had one game, and then he got offered the Welsh job. And, this will make you smile, because the day he got offered the Welsh job, I saw it come up on the television, and, oh, right, okay. So I rang him up. My first words to him, right, congratulations, you got the Welsh job, yeah. When do we start? And I was serious, to be fair. So I was like, when do we start? And he went a bit quiet, and he said, well, it doesn't really work like that, Bowie called me, because, I can't just give you the job type of thing as my assistant. So he had a while to think on it, and then he got back in touch and said, look, this is what I'm going to do. He said, I'm taking Eddie Niedzweski, and he knew Eddie from his time at Chelsea, and Eddie's a very good coach. And he said, I'm taking Eddie with me, and he said, but what I'll do is, with the under-21s, there was an old coach there, good coach called Jimmy Shoulder. He said, and you can go in and be an assistant to Jimmy, if you like, and obviously, again, keep learning the trade, let's say, if you want a better thing. So I went in there with Jimmy for a couple of games, coaching the under-21s, helping him. And I was lucky, if you like, because at the time, the under-21s and the senior team used to be apart, play games at different times, different hotels and whatever. But they would come together. I think it was Mark's instigation. So when we'd be training with the under-21s, the senior team would either be just arriving or just leaving or whatever, and the training ground. And Mark had been looking at me and the way I was coaching and the way I was with the players. And I think about 2 or 3 games into doing the under-21s, he pulled me one side and said, look, I've seen enough. I like what you do. I want you to come in with the first team, which is obviously then DLI did. So it became the assistant manager of Wales national team at 36 years old I was. And we had 4 years doing the Welsh thing. And I on the back of that, I had a contact from Steve Bruce, who was at the time at Crystal Palace, and asked me to go in there and help him or work with him, which I did. We weren't there long before he got asked to go to Birmingham City. And Steve asked me to go to Birmingham City to be his assistant manager, first team coach. And we got promoted to the Premier League at the end of that first season we were there. And I spent 2.5, 3 years with Steve Bruce before then Mark Hughes came out to doing the Welsh national team, got the job at Blackburn Rovers and asked me to go with him there. And we've been together ever since, really, Blackburn, Man City, Fulham, Queen's Park Rangers, Stoke City, Southampton. So in all, I was counting the other day, actually, in all, I think I've done now, let's say I've been a coach of well over 500 games, let's say, in the Premier League.
Wow, that's incredible. it's that's an awesome story as well, Mark. I really could just sit here and listen to you for an hour, like regale all the different things from your career. But there is a couple of questions I wanted to ask you. There's a couple of questions which people have asked about different things. But just you mentioned Southampton there. I was talking to Reese, who does some stuff for me with the Cardiff channel earlier, and we kind of came up with a question that we wanted to ask you because we'd both seen when you've done previous sort of podcasts or interviews, you'd mentioned when you're at Southampton with Mark, the owners or the CEO would come to you and say, "What do you think about this player?" And you kind of would give your opinion. And there was a point, I think, where you had said, "No, we don't fancy him," or along those lines. But then the club bring the player in, and you see that a lot at different clubs now, and that is something I think which happens at Cardiff as well. And I was wondering what that's like for coaches and for managers when the players coming in and not always, solely based on, what you guys' opinion or who you'd like to bring in.
It's a great question, Si. I'll tell you for why. Because if you go back to the time when Mark and I went into Blackburn Rovers, and Mark was basically, we had a great chief executive, our chairman there called John Williams, who literally let Mark, before he had Graham Souness there, so he let Mark and himself, if you like, get on with running the club. So we were allowed to bring in whatever staff, for example, we brought a guy called Mike Rigg into the club, who's, I think Mike at this time, he's in charge of the Academy of Birmingham, but he came with us to Man City as sport director, to Queen's Park Rangers as sport director. You were allowed, if you like, to highlight and bring in people who you thought were good, who you could work with. That's sort of by and way now. That's those situations have gone. You have to now go through, and probably rightly so, the right process now, and jobs are advertised, and invariably you have to go through a process. So, but when we went into Blackburn in terms of bringing players in, it was whatever people we saw, we liked, or you get a phone call here, a phone call there. At Blackburn Rovers, I personally was responsible for bringing in Rocky Santa Cruz, Benny McCarthy, Aaron McQueen, Chris Samba, just on the back of people ringing you up and highlighting them, and you'd have a quick look if you could get videos of them, a quick look, and trust your own judgment. If you couldn't get them in the building, to have a look at them on trial, let's say, and you'd go down that way, and the same to a degree happened at the start, if you like, at Man City. And going into Fulham and places like that. I mean, again, we managed to bring in Moussa Dembele at Fulham, who just on the back of an agent we trusted, knew him from Holland, and Mark Docardi was available. And I always tell people this, really, another good story for you, that Mark and I went to Man City, and the old owner was the Thai president, Thaksin Shinawatra. So we get in the building, and straight away, without looking at players, looking at games and whatever, and we'd actually gone 2 trips. We went on one trip to Hamburg to watch Vincent Kompany. Vincent played centre midfield in the game for Hamburg, and then we went to Espanyol in Spain to watch Pablo Zabaleta, and just to keep tabs on them and thinking, well, they could do a job for us. We still within the transfer window. First game of the season, we played Aston Villa away. I think we got beat 3-1 or something, and after the game we were told to go and meet Shinawatra and his people at the local hotel in Birmingham. So puzzled, what's all this about? We got to the hotel, and Gary Cook, the chief executive, said, look, not great news, Mr. Shinawatra, we've had an offer for Coluca, our right back at the time, from Tottenham Hotspur. They've offered, I think it was, I might be wrong either way, but a million either way. It was about 10 million, but they were going to pay it in one hit. And the owner, we were led to believe he wanted and needed the cash, so the deal was done. We had no say in it. So it wasn't a great start, if you like, just going into the place. And Mark was, upset, to say the least, saying, well, we've just got beat opening game, and you're selling basically our best player, our most valuable player. But we were told, Gary Cook said, well, you can go and bring, 1 or 2 in on the back of it. So we said, well, what do you mean? How, you've got to sell one, but you can bring some in. And he was like, well, yeah, but we can structure a deal where you're paying, X amount over the next 3 years or whatever it may be. So, okay. So I looked at Mark and I said, well, what about obviously Vincent Kompany and Pablo Zabaleta? And Mark, again, thought about it and said, yeah, okay, can we do it? So I said to Gary Cook, look, these are the two players we've seen, Vincent Kompany and Pablo Zabaleta. I said, I think we can get Pablo for around about €2 million. Vincent might be a little bit more. And in fairness to Gary said, okay, consider it done. Leave it to me. I'll do the negotiations. And I think they paid the two clubs again over 2 or 3 transfer windows, or it may be. But we ended up losing Coluca and bringing in Vincent Kompany for about €3 million and Zabaleta for about 2 million. But it was just, I don't think that would happen these days. Because if you did, or I don't think the situation would arise, where you're forced to sell like that. So such a personal meeting, if you like. But certainly, if you targeted or you knew some players these days, it would probably have to go to a sport director, a committee, and you look more at what the finances were to do it. But in fairness to Gary Cook, he just said, "Look, we'll do our best. We'll leave it with us. We'll get it done."
Following on,
as I say, things have changed. I'm not sure it's for the best, and I'm foot in both camps because I'm a sport director myself. But the days of managers, wanting to choose their players and only their players, it doesn't really work now. Obviously, because managers come and go so often.
Yeah, of course, and I understand that. And there's obviously a club has got a responsibility long term, I guess. Is there ever, or have you heard of or experienced, or is there ever any pressure though then from the club to play the players that they've brought in, maybe above the manager's head?
Again, that's a good question. I mean, I can only relate to my time at Reading, and you as a sports director, and you try to put the right squad in place for a manager. You want to back your money. You want to get him, if not his selection of play, you want to certainly get the players that'll fit into his system. Let's say, So that's what you try and do. And if and when you get players in that meet those criteria, then obviously you might sit there a bit pissed off on a Saturday if you see the team coming up and the manager has left out 1 or 2 of the players that you brought in. But again, that's when, if you're a good sport director, you've got to back your manager. You've got to, you try and you have conversations. You might try and bend his will sometimes, but ultimately you've got to back him and all the way and give him what he needs to try and be as successful as he can.
Mark, like I said, I could listen to you and talk to you for a long time, and hopefully we'll get to do it again at some point. I wanted to ask you a little bit, because just after you leave us, we're going to go full into Cardiff City and their relegation battle. But I wanted to ask you about the pressures of being a manager, being a coach around, a relegation battle and things like that, the high pressure games. How difficult is it when there is no room for error, and it's been maybe not a great season, or things people have been underachieving? That pressure just builds and builds and builds. Cardiff are in that situation now. How difficult is it for a manager to get the best out of the squad there?
Yeah, it's huge, and there's no. Believe me, mate, I've been a few times at different clubs over the years. There's no right and wrong way of doing things. There really isn't. But you got to keep on. You got to keep on believing. I used to have a situation with Mark, in numerous clubs. Right the way through. Let's say Queen's Park Rangers, when we stayed up with Queen's Park Rangers, and a lot of the club first year we were in the Blackburn Rovers. What I used to do is I'd get to about 6 games from the end of the season, and I would literally sit on my own in the office and get the 5 or 6 teams that were in or around us, and put all their fixtures up. And I'd literally have them physically on the wall in my office. And then you'd almost play, let's say, play God, if you like, and be trying to sort of find out, or through your own mind, predict what the scores, who's going to do what. You get some strange results. Everybody knows that at this time of the season. But it does put a sort of balance in your head that you're thinking, invariably you get to, I know you get strange results at certain times, but inevitably you get to this situation where teams, whatever the league they're in, if they're in and around the bottom 3, then very rarely they will average 1 point a game. So you almost say to yourself, well, okay, if all the teams are around us, if there's 4 games to go and we are 5 points clear, within reason, they're not going to catch us. They might win 2 in a row, but they're going to lose the next 3, let's say. And you just got to use that yourself, because what it does, it focuses your mind when you're working with the players, when you're, preparing players all the time. You've got to make sure that they focus, that they don't lose that will, if you like, to think, well, no matter how things have gone, any game, any team can win. Yes, within reason. People who listen to this will think, well, with all due respect, Cardiff aren't going to go and beat Burnley away. But things happen; they genuinely do. But more importantly, it's that sort of mentality of the players. You've just got to make sure they don't, because players are, they're crafty lot. They'll look through things. They'll see a sign of weakness and a sign of panic in the manager and the coach. You've got to give them that belief every day in the training ground, and certainly going into the games as well. And it becomes hard because, again, we're all human, and you play a game where you're expected to win. You might be 1 or 2-0 up, and you could see 2 late goals or a late goal. And as a coach, you want to come in and almost pull it. You're pulling your hair out, saying, "Look, my mind's gone after all these years." But you're pulling your hair out because you're thinking, guys, why you've blown it? You've thrown it away. You're not good enough for the jersey. That's what you want to say, but you can't. You've got to keep. They say massaging the ego all the time and making sure that they're on a positive note, which can be hard. We're all human.
Of course. Mark, thank you so much for your time, mate. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope we can get to do it. We're not constrained there. Yeah, it's flown by, mate. But I'm constrived by the minutes on the radio, unfortunately. So I gotta boot you off. But hopefully we can do it again when we got a little bit more time, because I really enjoyed it, mate. But it's fascinating.
I certainly hope Cardiff find it in them to get over that winning line, as you say, because the fan base they got there is amazing. They deserve more.
You and me both. Really appreciate it, Mark. And hopefully there'll be three Welsh clubs in the championship next year. But
yeah. Okay, so
cheers, Mark. Thank you so much for your time, mate.
Bye-bye.
Mark Bowen, ladies and gentlemen.
You're listening to Cardiff City World on Cymru Sport Radio, live from the Welsh capital. The most interactive football show in Wales, featuring guests, fan opinion, and all the latest news surrounding Cardiff City. Have your say and get in touch now.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, easy for me to say. And we are flying through it tonight. We're going straight into all things Cardiff City with the fan view. And I am delighted to be joined by none other than Mr. Jamie Anderson, who I feel like I've seen more than my wife in the last couple of days. But how are you, my friends? Got to unmute yourself, my friend.
Sorry, mate. That was really. I'm all right. I think I'm a bit sort of like a bit surprised maybe of what's obviously been said today. I don't know if surprised actually is the right word. But yeah, it's the fun that is Cardiff City, I suppose. So let's get into it.
Yeah, it's never a dull moment, mate. And I think ultimately, look, I will say one thing. Maybe it's a masterstroke. Maybe. I don't quite know how. So though, for anyone who's kind of not following, Omar Risa did a press conference today where, he said some stuff. I haven't seen it in full. I've only seen the quotes. So I do want to make sure that I don't take anything out of context in case there was additional context. But he said he reads, a lot of fan comments, and he thinks effectively